Tonight's story begins with a moment NATO's top officials had feared, downplayed, and ultimately failed to prepare for. It did not emerge from months of diplomatic collapse. Instead, it arrived suddenly, delivered in a single televised address from Moscow. 30 minutes that sent shockwaves through every major capital in Europe. 30 minutes that triggered emergency meetings at NATO headquarters in Brussels. 30 minutes that may have permanently altered the security order that has defined the Western alliance since 1949. Strike, what Vladimir Putin did today shattered a boundary that American and European leaders believed would hold. And once that line gave way, NATO did not pause or hesitate. Strike, the alliance responded with unity, urgency, and an extraordinary level of coordination. But here's the part no one is saying out loud. The 30-day ultimatum Putin just issued is not really about the demands on paper. It's about the test behind them. And if NATO fails that test, the alliance that ended the Cold War may not endure the next 30 days. For nearly 18 months, there were signals, not formal warnings, not official channels. Strike, just subtle indicators that the Kremlin was preparing something extraordinary. Putin has been aggressive, but never reckless. His actions have followed a pattern, a tempo, a kind of strategic consistency that Western intelligence learned to track, military drills that came before invasions, media campaigns designed to shape public opinion, diplomatic narratives built to justify what followed. Analysts knew the sequence, they knew the signs. And then, this week, the pattern stopped. Those who monitor Russian state media noticed it immediately. The coordinated messaging across RT, TASS, and Sputnik vanished. The military rhetoric faded. Dissenting voices disappeared entirely. And when the Kremlin goes silent, history shows it's only a prelude. What came next went beyond even the darkest scenarios NATO planners had prepared for. The silence broke, not with a warning, but with a move that rewrote the board entirely. Early Monday morning, European intelligence agencies detected what they described as highly unusual encrypted communications moving between Moscow and Russian military bases across the Western Military District. Among them were activation codes that had not been used or even seen in more than 30 years. These are protocols Russia reserves for moments of serious consequence. Signals that point to imminent military action, major strategic redeployment, or a fundamental shift in posture toward the West. Strike, NATO analysts could not immediately determine which category this belonged to, or whether it encompassed all three. What they did understand was unmistakable. Vladimir Putin was altering Russia's strategic stance. And when a nuclear-armed adversary adjusts its posture without explanation, even in subtle ways, every intelligence service in the world takes notice. Then came the address. Exactly at 8:00 p.m. Moscow time, Vladimir Putin appeared on state television. No advance warning. Strike, no diplomatic runway. Just a direct message to the Russian public, and by extension to the rest of the world. The demands were blunt and uncompromising. First, NATO was told to remove all military infrastructure placed in member states after 1997. That includes Poland, the Baltic nations, Romania, Bulgaria. Nearly every country admitted after the Cold War ended. Second, NATO was ordered to provide legally binding guarantees that Ukraine and Georgia would never join the alliance. Third, all NATO military exercises within 300 kilometers of Russia's borders were to stop immediately. And then came the detail that sent officials across Europe scrambling for secure lines. Putin gave NATO 30 days to comply. 30 days, not a proposal. Not a negotiating framework, an ultimatum. The response from the White House that followed was anything but routine. It was not symbolic, and it was not measured. Briefing after briefing described the move as destabilizing, unprecedented in the post-Cold War era, and a direct challenge to the foundations of European security. The strategy from the Kremlin was unmistakable. The tactic was obvious: make demands so extreme they might divide NATO, force members into tough choices, crack and test the alliance for cracks. Such a strategy only succeeds if hesitation sets in, but NATO showed no pause. Their reaction was immediate and remarkably coordinated. What happened today ranks among the fastest, most unified responses the alliance has ever mounted since its founding. Here's the situation. Within 4 hours of Putin's address, the NATO Secretary General called an emergency session of the North Atlantic Council. These were not ordinary consultations, they were formal urgent discussions. Known as Article 4 meetings, these sessions are triggered when a member state believes its sovereignty, territorial integrity, or security is at risk. In NATO's entire history, Strike, this mechanism had been used only 7 times. Today it became the 8th. Tonight, Strike, the Pentagon confirmed that the United States has already started repositioning military assets across Eastern Europe. This includes additional fighter squadrons to Poland and Romania, units that had only been scheduled for deployment in the event of a major escalation. The moves began even before Putin finished his address, a clear signal of how seriously Washington is taking the threat. The U.S., also strengthened the Baltic air policing mission, activated extra naval forces in the North Atlantic, and fast-tracked the delivery of promised air defense systems to frontline states. Essentially, they focused on shoring up NATO's eastern flank, addressing the gaps that Russia might have tried to exploit. That urgency is why the White House warning was so stark. Putin's ultimatum wasn't just words. It was backed by tangible military actions. Satellite images analyzed by Western intelligence showed battalion tactical groups moving closer to Estonia and Latvia. Strike increased naval activity in the Baltic Sea and the reactivation of air bases in Kaliningrad that had been dormant for months. Russia moved tactical nuclear-capable systems to forward positions, a posture that could shift from threat to operational action within days if left unchecked. NATO understood the stakes and responded decisively, not recklessly, not impulsively, but with careful strategy. They didn't offer empty condemnations or call for meaningless talks. Instead, they reinforced the very positions Putin had threatened. The message was clear. Any military aggression would trigger NATO's collective defense, but the situation grew even more tense. Analysts now believe Putin's ultimatum was a test, designed to probe NATO's cohesion after years of internal debates over burden sharing, strategic priorities, and relations with Russia. Strike. He wanted to see if the alliance would fracture under pressure, whether Eastern European members would be abandoned, and if the United States, distracted by domestic politics, Strike would risk confrontation over countries many Americans couldn't even locate on a map. Instead, the opposite unfolded. NATO held firm. The alliance acted with remarkable speed and unity, so immediate and comprehensive that it caught the Kremlin's attention, a rare feat. Moscow doesn't notice this level of coordination lightly, but today NATO responded, and it responded decisively. Defense officials speaking anonymously to major news outlets described Putin's ultimatum as a strategic gambit, an attempt to reshape European security without firing a single shot, yet NATO demonstrated both commitment and capability. The alliance acted with remarkable speed and precision. Member states issued statements almost simultaneously, a level of coordination that sent a clear signal. NATO is not just a paper alliance, it is a military reality. Putin had counted on hesitation. Instead, he encountered unity. As the evening unfolded, details of NATO's response became clearer. The United Kingdom accelerated its military support to Poland, delivering advanced air defense systems and rotating additional troops. Germany, often criticized for past delays, deployed extra Bundeswehr units to Lithuania under the enhanced forward presence. Strike. France activated parts of its rapid reaction force and placed them on high alert. Canada extended its military training mission in Latvia, adding personnel and equipment. Each move underscored the alliance's readiness and resolve to act collectively. This was more than diplomatic signaling, more than carefully crafted statements. This was real military mobilization. This was collective defense in action, the one thing Putin has struggled to weaken since the invasion of Ukraine began. For every pressure campaign he has tried, NATO has countered in ways that strengthened the alliance rather than fractured it. The 30-day ultimatum was meant to be different. It was designed to force impossible decisions. Instead, it produced unity. Putin expected Ukraine to fall in just 3 days. He assumed Kyiv would collapse and the West would quietly accept it. He believed NATO was a relic of the Cold War, incapable of facing modern challenges. Strike. He counted on Europe's dependence on Russian energy to limit any serious response. But tonight, the reality is the opposite of what Putin expected. NATO stands more unified than it has in decades. European nations are ramping up defense spending at levels not seen since the early 1980s. And the United States, despite internal political divisions, is reinforcing its commitment to collective defense. In an ironic twist, Putin's own actions may have achieved what generations of American diplomats could not, a Europe taking its security seriously. What makes this moment so tense and so consequential is that the ultimatum comes while Putin faces pressure on multiple fronts. Russian military commentators are demanding faster, more aggressive moves in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the economic elite are pushing for sanctions relief and access to frozen assets. Nationalist hardliners within Russia are pushing for escalation, even considering the possible use of tactical nuclear weapons. At the same time, pragmatists are searching for a way to allow Russia to claim victory without taking on more costs. Strike. Putin is trying to balance these competing pressures while leading a military campaign that has inflicted hundreds of thousands of casualties and accomplished none of its stated goals. When leaders in such positions make sudden, dramatic moves, it is rarely from strength, it is from pressure, from vulnerability. The 30-day ultimatum is less a demonstration of Russian power than a sign of desperation, and history shows that desperate leaders often take dangerous actions. NATO's official statement, now circulated to member governments and released publicly, was carefully worded to make a point: the alliance will not negotiate under threat. Officials emphasized that Putin's demands violate the core principles of European security and the sovereign right of nations to determine their own alliances. This was NATO's way of saying a firm, unambiguous no, not a request for discussion, not a polite acknowledgement, just a rejection. Strike, that kind of language only comes out when the stakes are truly critical. The alliance made its position clear: any attack on a NATO member will trigger a collective response. Strike Article 5, the principle that an attack on one is an attack on all, remains the foundation of the alliance. For 75 years, it has helped prevent large-scale conflict in Europe. Tonight it was invoked not as a historical reminder, but as a current, binding commitment. The NATO Secretary General spoke directly to the North Atlantic Council with unmistakable clarity. We will not be intimidated, we will not be divided, and we will not compromise the security of our members, he declared. He added that Russia's demands were not open to negotiation, but an attempt to revert to an era when great powers imposed terms on smaller nations. That era is over, he said. The alliance will respond firmly but carefully. There is no desire for conflict, but ultimatums threatening the safety of member states will not be accepted. The stakes were amplified by actions on the ground. Alongside the 30-day ultimatum, Belarus announced joint exercises with Russian forces near the Polish border, including the deployment of tactical missiles. Strike, an unmistakable show of military pressure. Russian naval ships sailed into the English Channel in what the Royal Navy described as a deliberate show of force. At the same time, cyber attacks on government networks in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania surged nearly 400% in the 2 days leading up to Putin's speech. Strike, Russian state media filled the airwaves with stories about NATO aggression, nuclear readiness, and the righteousness of Russia's position. All of this unfolded within just 72 hours. When Putin moves so many pieces simultaneously, analysts say it signals a broader strategy. This is not a random provocation. It is a coordinated campaign. Experts are now weighing several scenarios. One possibility is a limited military strike against a Baltic state, designed to see whether NATO would respond under Article 5 for a smaller ally. Another is a calculated effort to gain leverage in negotiations. Strike, using the ultimatum to extract concessions on Ukraine. The most concerning scenario, according to officials, is that Putin is trying to fracture the alliance itself. Strike, forcing member states into a choice between confrontation and compromise. Today, NATO made it clear there would be no hesitation, no hedging, no carefully worded statements leaving room to back down. The alliance acted with unmistakable clarity. NATO stands united. What's unfolding now is a test of collective resolve. Putin wants to see if NATO can be fractured by pressure, whether decades of alliance building can be undone with a single ultimatum. NATO's message is clear. Collective defense is not just words on a page, it is a real commitment, backed by both military power and political will. Washington aims to prevent any miscalculation that could escalate into direct conflict between nuclear powers. Moscow, meanwhile, seeks to reshape European security without fighting for it. The next 30 days may determine which vision prevails. Defense officials are monitoring Russian movements in real time. Troop concentrations near the Baltic borders have increased, though they haven't reached levels signaling an imminent attack. Russian naval forces are repositioning in ways that could indicate either exercises or preparation for blockade operations. Officials also note that the public ultimatum appears to be part of a broader psychological campaign intended to sow fear and division within NATO. NATO is not stepping back. In fact, the alliance is moving forward. Today's response, swift, coordinated, and backed by real military action, sent a clear signal to Putin: NATO will not be intimidated. It also reminded the world that collective defense remains a cornerstone of international security. As the 30-day countdown continues, Strike, more details will emerge about what Putin hoped to accomplish with his ultimatum. What is already clear, however, is that NATO acted quickly, preventing any attempt to exploit internal divisions. Frontline states received reassurance that they would not face threats alone, and the world saw that the alliance built after World War II is still capable of responding to modern challenges. The next steps depend entirely on Putin's choices in the coming weeks. If he retreats, Strike, this ultimatum will be remembered as the moment that strengthened NATO rather than weakened it. If he escalates, the alliance has already demonstrated that it is prepared to respond. They have demonstrated unity. They have shown readiness. And tonight, for the first time in years, the Kremlin seems to be pausing. Moscow is quiet, too quiet. When Putin is silent, it usually signals calculation, a careful weighing of his next move. Tonight, he may have realized something long overdue. NATO is not a paper alliance. NATO cannot be divided by ultimatums. NATO will defend every inch of its territory. This story is far from over. The clock continues to run. 29 days remain. But one fact is already unmistakable. The alliance stands firm. The commitment is real. And the 30-day ultimatum may have only strengthened NATO. We will continue to watch closely as the next phase unfolds, tracking every development as it comes.